Morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to Talga's webinar. We've just posted this presentation. If anyone wants to take a look at that via the website or the stock market and get a look at that, it is the same as the investor presentation we've recently used, with just a few, I guess, expansions on a couple of concepts that have come up in the questions. Thanks everyone for the questions that have come in already, and we will spend as long as we can on those. So I'm going to skip relatively lightly through the presentation itself, touching on a few things that hopefully will answer some of the questions, and where we don't, we'll spend as much time as we can afterwards answering those specifically. So welcome to Talga. Talga formed 10 years ago. We essentially floated on some gold deposits, but we actually moved into graphite very quickly because we wanted to be part of the solution for the energy transition to a more sustainable world. And this was going to be a mega trend that would be highlighted, I guess, by the shift to electric vehicles, which would mean a lot more consumption of lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries, predominantly the current supply chain is pretty dirty for some of the components, and particularly for the anode, which is made from graphite, we saw an opportunity to make a very clean sort of version of that product. That basically the foundations, the physics and chemistry of what we do would make it competitive globally and be the best solution for making those anode materials. And we're doing that in Europe, in Sweden. A bit of an overview. Shareholding hasn't changed much. I guess cash balance end of June is the only one we can refer to specifically, which is 5 million, but we just raised $10 million in a recent placement in the last few weeks, and we will talk about some details of that later on. There's various shareholders in various nominee companies, but essentially the top 20 haven't really changed significantly. So what are we talking about? So here's a battery, a pretty common EV battery, shall we say, at the moment, cut open to show all this black stuff inside. Well, what is that? Well, half of it's anode, which is graphite. There's actually over 10 times more graphite than lithium in a lithium-ion battery. And so all current commercial technologies of lithium-ion batteries use graphite in the anode. There's only very, very specialist, small-scale technologies that do not use graphite. It's one of the fastest growing markets in the world. You look at the growth rate now with EVs and the demand for batteries, it's very, very rapid. And particularly in Europe, which is the fastest growing market, they currently make no anode whatsoever. Talga is the only planned anode manufacturer in Europe, and no one else has really announced any plan to change that over the next 10 years. So auto OEMs are starting to drive battery demand. In the past, it was more electronics type companies and things like that, but a car takes a lot of batteries, and so the volume changes dramatically, and this is brand new demand for graphite. Graphite's predominantly done into the different industries, and only a small amount goes into batteries. That's changing, and over time it will be the largest consumer of graphite, but these battery graphite particles are very, very small, and they're highly engineered, and there's very special ways to make them. And that's not really part of the industrial supply chain, that's more of a chemical supply chain. Talga has invested heavily in our own in-house expertise in batteries and other materials. So a lot of you will know that we've been making graphene for some while now, and as graphene is being a nano material, it's quite challenging actually to measure and work with. And so we actually built a lot of technical capability in our relationships with Cambridge University, where we have a lot of our staff now. We have a lab in Cambridge today for R&D and for product development and technology development. A lot of our employees are actually the ex-auto industry or ex-battery industry people, very, very large set of skills in-house, and that allows us to interact directly with the battery makers, the cell makers, the auto OEMs, anyone in a highly technical capacity. We're a one-stop shop. So that really is a hard to catch up with advantage if you don't have that built already. You're quite a few years behind, and you have to contract stuff out and you can lose margins. So we've actually got quite a good knowledge of the industry internally. A large range of partnerships, far and away the majority of them we actually cannot show. We're under non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements with many people, and it's pretty rare actually we're able to talk about things in public. That's just a function of the commercial world in which we live in, but you can see here some of our major partnerships we've announced more recently to do with either the project and the anode technologies or the graphene products, but predominantly anodes now. The fastest growing market for anodes in the world actually is not Asia, it's actually in Europe. You've got a huge amount of vehicle ownership in Europe, and you've got a fantastic ecosystem now of legislation that's driving CO2, dropping CO2 from the supply chain as fast as it possibly can. You've got lots of towns, or in fact entire states now, that are outlawing diesel and then petrol engines over time. So this shift to battery consumption is really big in Europe. And what you see here is actually not the complete list of people that are, these are the ones that have publicly announced they're building batteries in Europe soon. So that's just an example of those. And I guess we have published previously that we have a huge amount of commercial relationships growing, and you can imagine that's with the majority of the companies on this sheet. Now, what's changed now compared to say a year ago? It seems to be that the evidence for the EV revolution is actually here. In the last 2 quarters, definitely prior to COVID, you saw this massive increase in sales of EVs. You've got lower cost models hitting the markets for the first time, so people are able to take it up. And the types of cars, you know, there's a greater range of them. There's SUVs now as well as sort of sports cars, should we say. Almost every major manufacturer has got tens of models of EVs planned, and they're starting to roll out now. So they haven't really been available for sale before. So the EV revolution is now, I think from an investor point of view, everyone's been aware of this megatrend for a while, and there's various booms in lithium, graphite, cobalt, and parts of that supply chain that people want to profit from. But it's finally here. And when you're looking at that supply chain, the actual customers ultimately is the consumer, but the people that are making the purchasing decisions for that supply chain are auto OEMs, and they're very concerned now with low CO2 sustainability. That means the way you make the material as well as your CO2 signature. Also, they're very interested in control and off price over time, and localization. And COVID this year has really highlighted the issue with having a 100%, in some cases, Asian or Chinese supply chain for some of the battery components has caused big issues. So this is starting to, the highlights of why Talga is in Europe is starting to pay off. So what are we doing about it? Well, we've planned for a long time to be fully vertically integrated, meaning from the mine to the product, this way capturing all the margins from the material. Now, it is a harder path because you have to therefore have an anode refinery, which involves purification and coating to sell a product that you can sell directly to a battery cell maker. We have a current plan for Nonnano South in our Batangi project, which is for 19,000 tons per year of anode. That does just under $190 million US a year in revenue, in gross revenue, and an NPV of just over $1 billion. That was in the study we published last year, and that's going through a DFS stage at the moment. And we have noted recently that we've got demand for a lot greater amount of that. So we're looking at ways to scale up in future. It should please bear in mind that we're very heavily regulated from the ASX, ASIC, JAW codes and other things about what we can say. We cannot say exactly forward-looking statements about how big we can go until we've got studies published that explain how we're doing that. But we can talk about how big the demand is at the moment. So where does Talga fit? Well, we're not really, our peers are actually chemical companies like Hitachi, POSCO, Mitsubishi, these makers of anode material today. So if you want to understand about the sales of coated anode, the final product to cell makers, then they're the companies you've got to look at. You're actually not looking at graphite mining companies or even companies that purify their product or make shaped purified material. We actually make fully coated product, what's called active anode material, ready to sell. So our customers are actually cell manufacturers. There's no one between us and them. Some cases we also interact directly with powertrain companies, but we also interact directly with OEMs. Why would we have a relationship with an auto OEM instead of a cell manufacturer. Well, in some cases, some companies do make both. The car maker is going to make batteries or is currently making batteries, but predominantly they drive what they need. They've got different models with different energy densities for different products. So the automakers set up things like centers of excellence and sort of intermediary technology centers where they can mediate between the cell makers selling them like sort of average or normal stuff that they can make versus the actual products they really need. So we interact with both cell makers and auto OEMs, and that way we've got a really good view of what they need and setting ourselves up to make what they need. Based on CO2 emission, Talga is capable of producing anodes with about 1/30,000th of the emissions of current materials coming out of Asia. And then if you compare it to synthetic, then it even gets much larger than that again. So even within the European sphere, North Sweden has got fully sustainable power, and we would use very, very little in the way of emissions to actually make our material. So it's world number one as far as we can tell. Also, because our resource grade is so high, and I'll just remind you, when you've got resource grades up around 25%, if you look at the average grade in, say, Chinese deposit around 4 or 5%, that may not, the difference between, say, a 5% deposit and a 25% deposit sounds like 20%, but actually it's 500 times more graphite per ton. So quite often we have 10 times more graphite per ton than a lot of other people that are currently making anodes from natural products. Also, because of our unique deposit combined with our processing technology, we have extremely high yields. So we lose practically no material coming through the system, and we have no industrial products. Everything we make really becomes an anode, and even what you would call, say, a waste, anything that doesn't get captured, we actually do capture it, and we've shown recently that we can turn that into graphene. So we're looking at a holistic, highly efficient, probably the highest yield again per ton, and when you combine that with your resource grade, you have a massive upgrade. The quantity of anode per ton of resource you have is in some cases maybe 5 to 10 times what the next competitor would have. And so our costs are competitive globally. Timeline is a combination of where we're at with the Swedish permitting system and how long it takes there. It's a first-class jurisdiction. We're in a mining district, but of course standards are very high, as they should be. So we have a very strict and very high-quality system. We've been years of surveys to then go into this permitting process that is underway. We have already been mining before in a trial mine stage. We extracted thousands of tons 3 or 4 years ago for our graphene development program, and now we have permission for another 25,000 tons, but this is specifically for anode material to make our Talnode product, and so that's all underway. So the mining permits are submitted. We've already got permission for what used to be our stage 1, that's a 25,000 ton mine, which can commission everything and make material available. That could be operating next year as an option if we need. We have the DFS, which will drive, shall we say, valuations of the company and discussions with project development partners, and various other approvals that are underway, including a pilot plant now, the EVA, electric vehicle anode plant, which we need to scale up the pre-production samples for automotive guys. So electronics guys don't need that, but actually the automotive guys need really, really big samples over the long term to start doing deals on the offtake. So we're looking at going in production commercially in 23. This is around the same time of what is currently a bit of a glut in actual graphite supply. There's quite a bit around it because the steel industry has been pretty depressed for a while, but as things pick up, that'll all dry up, and in 23 you start seeing demand just go crazy. By 25, frankly, it's supply chain Armageddon. So unless everyone starts building supply now, we see very strong upwards pressure on pricing. And yeah, there's a whole lecture in the interactions with auto OEMs and the cell makers about what they're doing about the supply chain. But I think you've seen various deals done in lithium. You've seen a few in cobalt. You are about to see some in the graphite for the anode side, supply side as well, I think. We get a lot of questions about technology. It's very easy for the media and various companies to promote various technologies that are lab scale or not not even necessarily commercial actually at all, but they're good technological breakthroughs. Our roadmap is designed all around using our graphite is in all of our products going forward, but we've got currently a large volume product called Talnode C, and that will just continue to scale and scale over probably easily the next 20 years. There will still be a massive workforce in the industry. Then we have silicon, which this is a silicon-rich product. It's still mostly derived from our graphite. It's a graphene, I guess, mix, but it can go. I think we've published numbers around 30% silicon. So rather than jumping to 100% silicon, which is extremely difficult, very expensive, and no one is building a factory. So at the moment, you see billions and billions of dollars build factories for things like Talnode C. They're not building them for these new technologies. They haven't happened yet. They're emerging. So there are increasing amounts of things like silicon creeping in, but it's happening very slowly, and commercially large volume may still be about at least 5 to 10 years away, probably not competitive price-wise until long after that. We have an ultra-fast charge product, Talnode X, which is more of a niche product because there's always give and take in batteries. So if you want to make really fast charging, then usually there's some other issues. So that's still in development. And of course, we also have a solid state. So solid state for us is not obviously you'll read about lithium metal anodes. Actually, you don't need lithium metal anodes at all. We actually make a sort of graphite graphene composite. This is in the Faraday Institution program at the moment. Our chief battery technologist actually is ex-Toyota solid state program developer. So yeah, we know something about it. What we're doing is our solution is usually to take these technical breakthroughs like silicon anode tech or solid state and make them commercial. And you do that by integrating them with really highly engineered forms of graphite, which we mine and process ourselves. And that's how you make them work. It's going the lab quality like perfection, but costing 100 times more than anything that's commercial won't actually get these technologies in a production. So we see ourselves as doing the most practical sort of executable version of those technologies, and they will all consume our graphite materials at their heart. So it's just going to be layer upon layer of different products over time. And in that way, we sort of future-proof ourselves. So we do get a lot of questions about, oh, what if anodes change to all silicon? Well, A, it's not going to happen in your lifetime. B, it may never happen commercially. So just take everything with a grain of salt, but the workhorse is going to be carbon at the heart of all this. So where are we at then with our strategy on growth? So right now we need to build a pilot plant and get our permits in place to go full commercial in 23. Why does it take that long? Well, it's actually not just to do with us, and it's actually not necessarily all in our control. The car makers, the battery makers spend a lot of years testing stuff. Graphite for anodes is different. Metals are easy. Lithium, copper, cobalt. If you spend money refining them and purifying them, you'll eventually get a number someone will buy. The graphite particles are different. They act based on their shape. So it's not just about purity, it's also the morphology or the shape of the particles. And then there's some other internal characteristics to do with crystallinity and other things to do with the performance. So in other words, anodes are unique in that whole supply chain in that you can't buy them based on purity, you have to buy them based on performance. You have to physically test them. And that supply chain for automotive is at least several years. So things are starting to happen now with some of our earlier customers, and more of the more recent ones, it's going ahead. By 23 is perfect timing for material to go into a really hungry market and then to really exponentially increase in scale after that. So walk before you run, but then we're going to be running really fast. So how are we going to feed that? A lot of these questions have come up saying, okay, Mark, you've told us you've got 300% plus, and now it's probably more than that demand for your product, but do you have enough? What are you going to do? Well, just something to keep in mind that our initial plan for development was here at Nonnano South at our Vitengi graphite project. So you can see there are a series of pit designs, and that's got over 10 million tons of resources. And what we did was in the PFS, we converted just under 2 million tons of those into an ore reserve. And that's how you do it. The study converts the resources into an ore reserve, and then the ore reserve can be used, I guess, in bankable or detailed feasibility studies and partners that want that level of sort of high level of governance and confidence in the deposit's economic. So we're not really constrained by tonnes here. We just chose a number that we thought would be a good amount of revenue per year, good amount of supply into what 1 or 2 years ago, we had to decide this years ago, was what the supply chain wanted. Now we get here and the supply chain wants, the customers want heaps more, far more than this. But what can we do? This has to go through permitting as it stands, okay? We've done a lot of work, a lot of surveys, a lot of time to put the submissions in to develop this project, and it sits on its own title and it's got its own infrastructure. While that continues through the process, we can't really touch it and play around with it. What we can do though is look to the rest of the deposits along strike. Now, people have questioned, is this the same stuff? Yes, it is. Have you tested it and found it's exactly the same? To a large degree, yes. There's still some tests underway, but largely everything we've done shows that this is essentially the same deposit, just running through the countryside. It actually goes for tens of kilometres, and here you're just looking at about 5 or 6 kilometres of that. So the northern part we call the Niska project, or the Niska series of deposits. It actually includes the North North, but those 3 resources you see there, they've just been drilled very cursorily, very quickly, just to prove they're there and work out where we want to put our permits and stuff in. We are now going to go doing some drilling on those to see how they link up together. If they do, obviously from the surface mapping you can see there they do, and at depth as well. We showed in the recently in the DFS that underground is technically possible here, so we're doing a lot of work on that. So the southern part is under the PFS, and this year we're doing work on that going into DFS, which is targeting coming out in the first quarter of next year. It's a process where we're regulated to do. We have to go in stages, and once those stages are sort of set, you have to pretty much follow through on what the plan is. So that's why you'll keep seeing that 19,000 tonnes of anode from the project, because that's what we did the ore reserve on, and that's what we did the PFS on, and going into the DFS. That won't change. However, north of the boundary, on the Niska part on the north, we're doing a scoping study on that. Now, we're not allowed by law to tell you how big that's looking at and all the different things it's looking at until it's finished and we publish it. Obviously, it's going to be, we're looking at something bigger. We've said that, and that's all we can really say. But there's plenty of tonnes there, and there's probably tonnes in between these deposits, and we're looking at exploring for tonnes underneath them at depth too. Bear in mind, these things were not like drilled out to the max, and we've spent years and millions of dollars drilling these things out, and we fully understand what we've got. We actually don't have visibility on everything we have. We've never wanted to spend too much money on drilling when we had enough material for the economic start of the project. However, due to the demand we're seeing from our interactions with, particularly with automotive OEMs in Europe, some really big ones have got really big demand, and we are starting to now leap ahead and having to look 5 to 10 years away in the future and look at moves we need to make now, and that's going to come from these extended deposits. So we're going to now drill them to get visibility on everything we own. We're going to sort of make sure that that value in resources is known to everyone in the company. We're also going to do some exploration around this area where we know we've got some big targets, and we're going to look at converting those into resources as well. So we just want to have a continued growth story in the resource base. Then we can continue to look at the best way of feasibly developing these projects in conjunction with all the stakeholders, with everyone in Sweden, and work out what's basically setting up a giant new industry that will last for many, many decades here. So recent milestones, people, during the depths of COVID, we put out a bit of news that we partnered up with Mitsui on the project. At the moment, you can only see things like MOUs, but we're very, very pleased to work with a group like Mitsui who are interested in the whole project. We have a huge amount of commercial engagements underway that include automotives, electronic companies, and battery cell makers. We do have permission. We've been through quite an extensive process, so we've got the equivalent amount of ore that would make 5,000 tonnes of anode available now, although that's starting up next year is sort of looking at it as an option, if probably the following year, but that'll just suit whatever we need to do for the development of the project. we've done big work. We've basically built a working model of the whole mine. We've already trial mined material. We already have processed it through a large flotation plant. Concentrate gets turned into coated anode at some of our partners, and that's been tested by automotives and battery cell makers, many of them. They're also testing our silicon products as well, actually, some of them right now, which is looking pretty exciting. So what's coming up? There's drilling work, there's things like geophysics and drilling and exploration. So we're looking at the resource base. There's always product development work, and of course, mostly talking with potential partners for developing the project and for things like offtake on the material, technology partnerships, sales distribution, all those things are flat out just going all the time. And that's why maybe you'll see us actually not publishing as much as we used to on a monthly basis, because yeah, it's really hard to find the time to put out smaller updates. So we'll keep doing what we can. The boards has been this way for a while now. I guess we've had a recent change with a board member coming off, but we also wanted to show you that if you look at the breadth of experience from these guys, like for example, Terry Stinson, our chairman, worked for Siemens for many years and in automotive. So there's some good production technology experience, and it's something that will continue to grow in the short term, I'm sure. And in our management personnel too, we have the ex-commercial director of Talga Resources, which makes mineral sands, which are quite, I guess, there's a whole range of different industrial products that get made from them. And so Martin Phillips, our COO, he's got great experience in building everything from battery recycling plants, smelters. So building the actual plant, the refinery itself is very well taken care of. And you can see some of the rest of our team. You can read about their accomplishments and their backgrounds, which are perfectly suited to both anode materials, graphene materials, advanced materials combined with, so you've got mining sort of side, then we have the technology and product side, and we're actually building more commercial capacity to it at the moment, which is going very well. So there's a bit of a quick run through on, there's the usual disclaimer, sorry, I should have done that at the beginning, and there's some details in the back if you want to look at the outcomes of the PFS and our current graphite resource, which in total in Sweden is over 50 million tonnes. So this is the largest resources in Europe of natural graphite that's defined to investment grade and under JORC or NI 43 conditions. And at Vittangi, we have the highest grade resources in the world. So at that, I think I need to get through to your questions.
All right, well, thanks, Mark. In terms of questions, we've received a lot of questions from shareholders before the webinar, and we've tried to group those into logical sort of categories where they're similar. So, Mark, if you'd like to move on the screen there to the first batch of questions. Now, you covered a lot of this during the presentation in terms of how expansion works and speaking about, you have a current DFS for 19,000. And then in terms of being able to speak about more expansion, you need to finish the scoping study. But did you want to comment any further on some of these specific questions that we received prior to the webinar?
Sure. I mean, just quickly talking there about do we have enough raw material to supply, much greater tonnages? Yes. I think you can see that just from looking at the current resource base, but you can imagine that there's still more growth in that again. When would Talga consider expanding plants to meet the demand? That's underway. So the Niska expansion will do that, and there's different levels of that as well. So when the scoping study on Niska comes out, that'll reveal details of what the initial expansion plan is, and then probably after that, it can get bigger as well. So we have all the raw materials we need, which covers off on most of those questions.
Mark, did you consider procuring third-party graphite? That's the last question there.
Okay. Look, we have actually. We have thought about if a supply of other material could, make things happen faster and run it through our processing tech and feed it into customer developments. To be honest, a couple of things. One is mostly our graphite being very high grade, it's got a very, very low environmental impact. So when you look at the sustainability side, the other graphites actually don't meet that criteria. So we wouldn't really be very well aligned with our customers and our mission on supplying greener anodes. So there was no way really viably, if you're using, say, a petroleum-based synthetic product or a natural product from another part of the world that doesn't have the same good conditions as here, then it wasn't going to comply with that. And secondly, the products themselves, we've tuned the processing and the product range to suit our particular deposits as well. So it's not to say that you couldn't use it on other deposits, but you won't get the same benefits. We've got a really efficient good system, and so we did not see that distraction and that lack of alignment as working.
All right, thanks, Mark. That's a pretty clear answer there. So if we would perhaps move on to the next category of questions, which is related, and that's on the continuity of ore quality across deposits.
Yeah, it's super contiguous. So I mean, back a few years ago when we rock sampled the outcrops, the average over, I think, 15 kilometres of sampling was within 1% of the resource grade. It's amazingly consistent. Are the Niska deposits the same characteristics as Nonnano? Yes, as far as we know, yep, they are. There's a bit more testing to be done, I think, in batteries, but so far all of the work shows they're exactly the same. It's the same geological unit, it's the same grade, same flake sizes, everything about it is the same.
Okay, that's excellent. So if we perhaps move on to the next category of questions, and that is on capital raising strategy.
Yep.
So there's a few questions we received there, and if you want to sort of discuss the previous raising. Yep.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, these things are always compromises, right? But so we did an SPP, a share placement plan, to shareholders at 44 cents late last year, so about 8 months ago. As I said, at 44 cents. Now, by law, we're not allowed to do another one within 12 months, so that wasn't an option. Some people have asked about why didn't we do a rights issue. Rights issue at the moment would have us hanging in the market for at least 6 weeks, even an accelerated one. And there's a lot of risk out there at the moment in the markets. They've been highly volatile. It's been a massive year. We did well we didn't panic as others did back in the middle of COVID back in March and unnecessarily dilute the company. We've sort of waited until we could deliver some news and do something at a better time. In this case, we also had some strong inbound interest from some institutional funds, and we just thought it'd be best to execute something. We will look to include shareholders in things going forward. We always do. In this case, we thought it'd be better just to execute something and move on. And I think, if you look at the share price and the response around the placement, it's actually been pretty well received and supported, considering the market. This isn't like the hottest area in the world in some ways. We've also got there about someone thinks we should have raised more money. Well, I'm still a large shareholder. Don't like dilution so much. I guess you could say we're pretty confident about what's coming up over the next 6 to 12 months and the opportunities we'll have to fund the company appropriately. So we didn't feel it was the right time to go bigger at these share prices. Someone asked about Citibank being one of the largest shareholders. No, just bear in mind that groups like JP Morgan, Citibank, all these, we've got a lot of instos in different groups now within nominee companies. So they're not the final beneficial holder, but we can really only publish the nominee companies. So it doesn't mean that Citibank is a shareholder. They will represent a whole bunch of other shareholders inside them. How is the rest of the plan going to be financed? That's a good question. Well, we've got a whole range of ways we can do it. There's been some people that are offering debt for the whole thing, or you can sort of equity fund the whole thing. And then, of course, there's project equity as well. So some parties we're talking to are interested in funding the project on the basis of getting a percentage of the project. So becoming partners and owning the project, and then potentially free carrying Talga and financing the project. So I can't say much more, obviously, than we're looking at ultimately the best mix of the cost of the finance combined with the sort of parties that we would team up with and what it would mean to have them involved in the project. And there's many, many more than you've got visibility on, but we're really, really excited about our options. It's, to be honest, there's just not enough pie to go around at the moment. So yeah, we're very confident that we'll be able to do it in the best possible way. But yeah, it can become a very big project over the next 5 to 10 years.
Now, Mark, before we move on to the next slide, I'm actually going to dip into the live questions here because we've had a few that are similar to these questions up at the moment. So I'll run through them quickly.
Sure.
First question was, and I'll just read all four out at once. Does Talga see a need for additional future financing prior to construction? Hi Mark, when do you plan for the next round of capital raising? Mark, are you able to talk a bit more about financing for the Batangi Batangi project and progress of that at the moment? And finally, can you get funding before a commercial deal, and can you get a commercial deal before funding the plant? Now, I don't know if you need to address all of those because you've touched on them a bit, but if there's anything else you just wanted to add in response to those.
There's very little there's very little detail I can tell you other than things like we're always reviewing our capital needs and we'll always make what we feel is the best choice at the time. I can tell you that some of the discussions with potential partners on the project that include funding, they're how shall I put it? They can be very slow because they're very big groups, and you're not dealing with like a single entrepreneur running something. You're dealing with lots of committees and things. So look, all those things are possible. Commercial deals before and after, different financings in different ways. Remember, we've got a pilot plant we want to build first, so we do need to look at the financing for that separately to the main development. It may or may not have the same parties that will go on, but I think the next 6 to 12 months is going to be the most transformative of Talga's entire life. It will set everything up and you'll have really good visibility in that time, but I don't think I can say much more.
All right, thanks, Mark. Perhaps we'll move on to the next category of questions then, which is on general company progress and the pilot plant. I know you just spoke about the pilot plant, so would you like to keep going on that?
Yeah, I guess people may not understand why can't we just sort of make more stuff out of a current German plant. Well, that was predominantly a graphene plant, and the anode plant has got a whole batch more of different equipment and different sort of chemical demands, shall we say, and therefore that also changes what site you can be on. So we have to, we're in the process of choosing that site now and choosing the technology partners and the financing partners for it. Given the plan has been scaled up, why is it moving so close? It's just, okay, so with auto manufacturers, they need different size samples at different parts of their qualification program. So right now, we're sending out samples of up to several hundred kilos heading towards tons, but they may need between 1 and 10 tons per sample probably over the next 6 to 12 months. So we need to scale up. So there's an intermediate step before you get into production where you need to provide big samples on continuously running equipment to qualify for the auto. Now, if you're selling to a trader or someone else, you don't have to do all that. But if you do that, you lose all your margins. If we're going to sell directly to end users, then you actually have to essentially join a big boys club, which is you have to go into an early form of production, which we can do through the EVA plant. Is it being built at the request of a specific group of customers? Yes, it is actually. I think I can say that. Qualification status. Okay, you recently saw we put out an announcement that we couldn't really say a lot of detail on with Pharisis. You would imagine the Pharisis have tested our material and have found it okay and are happy for us to announce that we've got a relationship and that we're doing something together. I guess all I can tell you is that we're seeing a similar thing with many other customers. So we don't have any issues around our product being commercial or not going forward. You'll just have to wait and see how the things we can say in public when we can. But no, we're very confident about that. Results from different parties are very exciting, actually. We've got many different options there. Will it use already extracted graphite? Actually, okay, so the pilot plant does not need to actually have the trial mine. We do have a stockpile of several thousand tons of material now. So we can make up to about 500 tons of anode currently, but whether that's enough or not is a bit touch and go. So that trial mine is going to be really useful for being able to feed that if it needs to get a little bit larger, which it may well do. Will it make revenue? It's not commercial scale. It may make some money, but not. I wouldn't expect it to be material. The point is you're qualifying your material with big customers for the big, for the rest of commercial production. So it's not the point to be commercial. It's just until you're doing like the full commercial stage, it's not worth worrying about as a public company. Not producing anode product in 23 suggests Talga's happy to remain something has given up the idea of becoming a commercial anode producer. No, we're flat out becoming a commercial anode producer. You said setting up an anode supply chain is actually amazingly hard. If you look back at the history of anodes, you can see that these Asian-based chemical companies, they were actually already giant industrial conglomerates, and they set up the anode making as like sidelines and piece by piece over many decades. To go and create a whole new one from scratch and be vertically integrated, which they are not, to be a specialist and provide that, it just takes a bit of time to do it properly and do it in the real world, not just talking about it. It's just there's a lot of series of steps to go through. It's actually very, very challenging, and as it would be to get such big rewards. I mean, you've seen the gross revenue potential of just 90,000 tonnes of anode, so you can imagine what our full potential is later. Commercial DFS, should we expect any offtake agreements? Look, they can happen anytime, but to be honest, the automakers stuff, that it's not really their style. They don't really do offtakes as such. They do purchase agreements, and purchase agreements come after a huge amount of qualifying, discussion, and various commitments. They could happen anytime from like now or be predominantly next year. It sort of depends on where we're at with their programs and where they're at. COVID has definitely slowed things down for a lot of these customers this year, but we're seeing the pace pick up again now. Everyone's sort of back more in earnest now. Past experience and achievements of the management team. I touched on that earlier, I think, so I think we can.
Mark, just quickly before we move on from that slide, the location of the pilot plant?
Still being decided. We'd like to build it in Luleå in Sweden, which is where we're going to build the anode refinery, or that's where the plan is. However, we do have to look at all of our options, which could include other countries, because we have to look at different relationships with the customers, and also look at the timing of, you know, who needs various permits for things in certain ways. But right now, our number one pick is to do everything in Sweden, but it may be that we have to build either the pilot plant or anything else somewhere else to mitigate, you know, against any further time delays. But it's looking good for there at the moment.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And here we've received a range of questions on future technologies, you know, technologies that are quite a sort of, you know, in the lab still, and how they might impact on Talga.
Okay, well, there's, to do a 6-hour lecture on this stuff, but in general,
we don't have 6 hours, by the way, Mark.
I'm happy to some other time. Predominantly graphite's like the workhorse of batteries, so we expect to see that still being the bulk of anode volumes going forward. But no doubt, you know, you've got increasing amounts of silicon and other sort of battery techniques coming along, but they're usually years and years ahead in the future and face lots of issues, and that comes out over time. Does Talga see advertised performance advantage work with the different cathode chemistries? Yes, it does. Works in different cathode chemistries. It's pretty agnostic about that. And it works in different electrolytes, and it works also in different, whether you're water-based or different types of solvent too on getting the current collector built on it. Could Novonix's DPMG process have a positive impact? Not really, no. We are aware of their work and of that machine, and I guess I could just say that we've already developed a very efficient process, very low cost, consumes very little energy, and produces very good materials. So it's not, it would not be a positive impact for us to look at integrating that bit of kit. How does our anode stack up against synthetic? Really well. In fact, we often get comments, if you don't know how the material is made, quite often most people wouldn't pick it from a really nice, high quality synthetic, like a Japanese synthetic. It goes really, really well. It's like a natural version of synthetic, to be honest, especially by the time we finish getting it processed and out. It's almost a semi-synthetic product. Will Talga's offerings of natural be some part of the 1 million mile battery solution? Our anode can go into almost any against any cathode and chemistry, as I just said. So it potentially could go into every type of battery that's made in the world of lithium ion at the moment. So could be. Could Mark include a few comments on ability to stay current with continuous rapid advances? So that you saw that in our technology roadmap. We've already been investing in this for years, guys. That we've already been setting up different products that will mature over time, that are designed to fit in with the market, not just marketing, talking about when real demand comes from real customers. So the customers that are right now testing our silicon materials, there's almost nothing I can say. you know, it's really exciting what they're doing, but they're very excited about performance and they're very specific focus on performance, not so much cost, because cost is a bit hard. But going forward, you know, we see really good, exciting growth in that area. But the volumes will still be not massive compared to Talnode C, the main product. But yeah, we've got it covered. That's why we're choosing silicon, solid state. Yeah, these are the main sort of inflection points in technology going forward. Potential problem of the development of anode-free batteries. Okay, wow, there's a lecture. Look, they're actually not anode-free. They do have an anode for a start. It's just the way they've got spun. But if you go look at, and I think there's some good YouTubers doing videos on all that sort of stuff. If you go looking at it, you'll probably see some of the issues around cost, manufacturing, safety. There's all sorts of issues with that stuff that have to be solved. So no, we don't see any particular technology that represents a threat to using bulk things like the Talnode C for decades, really. Just even on a cost basis alone, it's probably not going to happen. But if it does happen, it'll probably involve carbon, and we can sort of spin our way into using that material. But all of these, as I said, billions of dollars of factories use Talnode C type material. So they're not just going to throw that away. These things are going to run for decades. They're not just going to suddenly change that overnight, throw it out and try to introduce some brand new tech. So as new tech comes in, don't stress. We'll probably find a way to take advantage of it. For all you know, we probably have a product that would suit it anyway. We'll always have the best way of making the carbon, the crystalline carbon, that'll probably suit these products in energy, which is why we do what we do.
All right, let's move on to the next set of shareholder questions, which is on graphene products and non-anode use cases, which is particularly graphene related.
Yeah, I feel bad sometimes for not servicing our graphene fans, but do not worry. Graphene is actually still going on quite well. Actually, it continues to develop. It's just the batteries are needed to. The current battery demand is a good volume to build the project, and then we can have graphene products coming out of that as well as they commercialize. We've got a question here on printing cement. Regarding printing, don't understand the advantages of using graphene. Okay, so up till now, the only way to make conductive inks for printing things that can conduct electricity, the best one to use is probably silver. Why? Because it's really conductive, but it stays conductive when it oxidizes. That's pretty weird. So gold would work really well, too expensive. Silver's a lot cheaper, but it's actually not cheap. Graphene is highly conductive and will still conduct it, won't oxidize. So graphene can be used as a replacement for silver. That can be in solar work as well, potentially, but a lot of different printing sort of technologies. And that gives you functionality. So you can have, I see here, we've got something like barcoding. Yeah, so it's about making something instead of a black ink that's just for a visual response, you could have a black ink that's also capable of triggering, you know, a Wi-Fi signal or something. So smart packaging can come in. And also graphene is, should we say, notorious for being the most impermeable stuff in the world. Can stop, you know, even gases like helium. So you can imagine that if you mix a little bit of graphene into things like paper and cardboard packaging, that it can slow oxygen getting through it, and you can essentially convert paper and cardboard into a sort of the same similar use to replace plastic. So where you need an impermeable barrier that's plastic, you could have one in paper instead, which is highly recyclable. Something about graphene anode for concrete. Concrete's a big market. We did concrete 3 years ago. We're still doing some things in it, but not as hard as you would think. Why? Because while it's big volume, it's also extremely low. It's the amount of money per ton in concrete is very, very low. So while you need only a small amount of graphene, it's also a relatively low margin market. So we're still working in that area, but very slowly and carefully to not you know, end up in something that commercially is not going to be more. Basically, the margins and things like anodes and other graphene products is higher. So we go about that very carefully. Do we patent? Actually, the question about patenting is important. We sometimes choose not to patent because we don't want stuff to go public. When you publish a patent, it all goes public. So some things we want to keep as know-how, and we won't patent it. Other times we'll patent something where we think it's broad enough that it will have, you know, a significant commercial kick for the company. We've actually got quite a strong system of identifying IDFs and IP management in the company, and it's going really, really well. you'll see some news on those things, I guess, over the next 6 months or so. Preliminary results from the ship coating. That was a beauty, wasn't it? It was great seeing what is essentially the world's largest application of graphene in real, just going for it, floating around in the oceans as we speak. No, we do not have preliminary results as yet. We will get them as the ship owner does various tests over time. But in reality, you're not going to get, you won't see any real kick for about 18 months from when it got launched, and so that's next year when we'll probably get some decent results on that. But the whole coating area is really exciting, and the guy that wanted the ships painted with our graphene on it was pretty happy last time we spoke. Do they compete with each other for a limited supply of the best ore? No, we're not constrained by tons. So whatever you want to make, if the demand is there, the resources are there. So we can make any practically any volume needed from anything in the world, especially when you look across all of our projects in Sweden, because we mostly talk about Vittangi, but the Jalkunen and the Radiavi projects have also got their own large aspects of graphite as well, so it won't be a problem. Will these be assessed prior to the DFS? Probably not. Results, the packaging is just always underway. It's just a continuous program underway. We build root causeness, and we're really excited about it. You can only say something about it when you can publish something about it. Solar industry, very good industry. Nothing we're really going into in great detail at the moment. Grabat and other battery and graphene types. Not really. I guess, guys, just to wrap that up, we still have graphene scientists and graphene products out at work being tested. Some stuff's in the ocean, some stuff's under the sun, some stuff's under different gases, some stuff's mixed in plastics, and it's literally being tested. Some stuff's actually on retail shelves right now in parts of the world where the people are trialing material and just putting them out there and seeing what the consumer thinks of them. And when those things are mature enough and there's some sort of a deal that gets signed off on where we can tell you, then we will. But it's actually, there's quite a lot of it underway, and they're often very exciting large volume applications, so they take a lot of testing. And that's been the issue with graphene all along, is it takes a lot longer than you think for people to look at new materials and bring them to the point where the commercial volumes get there. But that's all that spearhead of work has been done, and a lot of those individual products are maturing now.
All right, Mark. Well, that's the end of questions that we received prior to the webinar. If you want to jump back about 5 or 6 slides to the blue shareholder question slide, we'll jump into the live questions. And we'll start with the first one here. Does anode work on fuel cells?
No, they don't work like that, although we do have products for fuel cells. No, the fuel cells are a different beast. What the critical thing of fuel cells is the bipolar plate. It's like the center. So it's that needs coatings of different types to get the electrons out from the reaction across to the current collector. But no, they don't have anodes. We're not making products for fuel cells at the moment. However, we do have some fuel cell tech, some coatings, and some uses for graphene in fuel cells that we're excited about. And when we can, we'll develop those further.
All right, thanks, Mark. For the next question, someone has used the T word. How many active graphene partnerships engagements do we have, and are we working with Tesla at all?
I can neither confirm nor deny working with Tesla. I guess people can assume, we'll have to assume things are there, but obviously they're a major electric vehicle manufacturer and a battery manufacturer, so it's very exciting to see what they're doing and where they're going. With graphene, with the number, I don't think I can change anything from the last time we spoke about our total graphene engagements, which was more than 100. I think we'd still have more than 100 in total engagements on graphene alone. But that doesn't mean that every single one is an active program. Sometimes people get results and they have to go through various committees and working on things for 12 months plus at a time. So there's still a lot of those.
All right,
we'll try and sneak in the Tesla thing.
Thanks, Mark. So the next question is, would Talga consider a buyout offer anytime up to full production in 2023?
Depends on the offer. So you can never say never. Our job technically is to create shareholder value, right? So it's whatever's going to make sense for shareholders. I've got my own views on the value of the company going forward, and I'm sure everyone will. A few people have expressed concern that we're too cheap, or we'll be too cheap at a time when someone may do something aggressive like a takeover. But that's part of our strategy too, is being prepared for that if it happens, but also looking at our partnerships very closely around building ourselves a moat with some of our partnerships to make sure that our value is fully realised, shall we say, over time. So we'll see.
Right, thanks, Mark. And the next question is a little bit of a subsidiary one, which is, Mark, why were the gold royalties recently sold off at a time when the gold price has just started to rise?
Oh, gold price hasn't just started to rise. I'm an old gold bug, so it's taken like 25 years for gold to start running. Actually, it's been going up continuously since 1999, and right now the price is pretty high. Sometimes there's a famous saying in the markets, which is when the ducks are quacking, you should feed them. We had a willing buyer, and that is often a good time. It's to sell when others are buying, and obviously buy when others are selling, sort of thing. The Buffett quote about the best time to buy is when there's blood in the streets, but also the best time to sell is when everyone's really excited. So look, it was a good deal. Trident are a good group. We are going to get some of their stock, and we're quite excited about seeing what that'll be valued over time. To be honest, if you look back, Talga's actually realised a lot of value out of its gold projects. We exited some of them over the last few years for shares that did very well, extremely well. We've probably paid for Talga to run for more than a year on the sale of those things. So look, it was just management and a call, and the board supported that. And so yeah, it's a good time.
Mark, just quickly before we move on there, I'm going to ask my own question here. Were any of those projects currently in production or paying actual cash royalties at the moment?
No, importantly. So those projects were all exploration level. In fact, only one of the 4 projects had a resource on it, which is being developed by another company. But if you look at when that resource may be mined, it actually was not even included in the current mine plan. So in the foreseeable future, for Talga shareholders, you are not going to see anything arise from those royalties. So we decided this was the better way to commercialise it now instead of the future. We thought the value was pretty good.
All right, thanks, Mark. So the next question is, and we sort of covered this, when will Talga announce supply agreements to the market?
As they are signed and arise. By law, guys, we cannot just talk openly about everything, not just from the commercial side of our partners, but just the ASX and the ASIC laws and everything else, until something is signed. So if we're, say, 85% deep into a commercial process with a large car company, we can't tell you that. We have to wait until it's 100%. It has to be signed off on. It has to be in the bag, signed off, and only then can it be done. So drafts aren't good enough, and so that's the way things are for Talga. That's what we have to live with, and so we can only announce them when they're at that point. And I think if you look back in our history, that this is what happens is everyone gets frustrated, it takes longer than they think, and that's the commercial reality, because we're not doing things with like just little traders, we're actually doing things with the end users, right? They're big, complex companies, and they're very slow and methodical about the way they go about things, and they're very careful about their brands. So it takes a while, and then you should have a breakthrough where, so yeah, even when you see MOUs with us, people say, it's just an MOU. So bear in mind that a large company is putting their reflection of their brand with you. Like, it's a big deal for these big companies, even to do a non-binding MOU. Like, it's quite a good sign, I would say. And there's just lots and lots and lots that will not let you do that until the testing is over and they want to literally put in a purchase order or agreement. Even then, they don't want their supply chain to be revealed. So it's a challenge, but we see some really good ones arising. That's all I can say.
All right, thanks, Mark. The next question is, does Talga plan to market graphene given its economics?
Sure, over time, yeah, but we're definitely moving away from that just make it and hope they'll come sort of model, because you end up just doing heaps and heaps of free R&D for people. So it's really been a journey of discovery on that. A lot of these companies talk about innovation, they don't necessarily do it. So it's just a long, slow process, and I think so. Our plan going forward is to only work with companies that have really got a strong demand pull for this material, and will start to fund that themselves. And so it's not really being funded by us, and and then we only set up supply when they're ready, when they're finally ready, rather than setting up the supply chain and then hoping everyone's going to buy the stuff. So yeah, we're still definitely supporting it going forward. A lot of exciting parts of it. It's just we've only got so much space to talk and publish things.
Well, Mark, and this will probably just about be our last question, as we're past 11:30 now, and unless someone can quickly sneak one into the question queue, this is actually the last question. And the question is, do you still have projects in Australia?
So we don't have resource projects in Australia. However, we do some of our metallurgy work here, and we are doing some technology development here. We have some very, very good science and technologies in Australia, and we are still listed here, and we do what we can here, but we don't have any resources here. I reviewed all the resources in Australia 10 years ago. There's nothing here that we want when it comes to a supply chain that's better than what we've got in Sweden. However, from a technology point of view, in processing in particular, processing and manufacturing of anodes, there actually are some things we're doing here in Australia, but we can't talk about them right now. Hopefully we can over the next, hopefully before Christmas.
All right, Mark, well, as the storm starts to set in behind you there, that's all the questions we've received, and we've gone past 11:30 now, so I think we'll probably head to wrap up the webinar. Is there any sort of final last words that you wanted to make?
No, just look, thanks for your support and understanding. We've got over 5,000 shareholders now. It's invigorating to have so many, so much interest in us. We love what we do. We're really excited about what we're doing in the world. We have a purpose. We have the economic purpose, but we have a really good social purpose as well. And we take it very seriously. We do our best. We're on a mission, and yeah, really appreciate everyone that's coming along on it. I understand when there's frustrations along the way, but I just ask you to be patient, look at the big picture, look at where we've come from, look at our values, look at where we're going. Yeah, if you want to come on that journey, very, very glad to do as many of these things, as more of these in future, and try and set up as many interactions as we can so that you can get the details you want out of that journey. But otherwise, yeah, watch this space. Look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining the webinar, and we'll conclude the webinar now.
Thanks, Shane.